Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back if you've been before. If you haven't, if this is the first time you've stumbled across it, be prepared to be disappointed by me for a few minutes, but then dazzled by our special guest today. Another show, only one show this week that didn't have a guest, and those of you that tolerated me yesterday saw me tearing into heavy hitters such as Thomas Hobbes and Jean-Jacques Rousseau and talking about why I disagree with them. Today, you've got a similarly lofty character, the enigmatic Tom Jesson will be joining us to talk a little bit about sciatica, but mainly about filtering news and how he goes about his news diet being digested in a time of fake news and controversy, and how he keeps so productive, as many of you have noticed he has been over the years that he's been on the scene. So I want to bring him in, but before I do, I want to I've been working with Tom for a little while, met him as a student, and seen him grow into the wonderful character that he is. And we've just been laughing about the fact that he said photos follow you around. He said that's definitely true. This photo follows him around a little bit. This one's from the Physio Matters website, which also means when I was thinking about how do I introduce Tom Jesson for those that don't know him, I thought, why not use the blurb that is on the Physio Matters website, which is that we found him in Northumbria and he soon fled to Texas. Considered one of the brightest young minds in the MSK industry, Tom has turned his hand to understanding and translating sciatica research. His penchant for evidence, velvet Geordie accent, and sharp wit are the telltale signs of being mentored by Rob Tyre. And so, without further ado, after that introduction, may I bring you, hopefully this works, Tom Jesson, everyone.
Hello.
Can you hear me all right, Tom?
I can hear you very well, thanks, Jack. Thanks for having me.
Oh, no bother. Let's see, can the world hear you? That's the main thing. It looks like our friend David Poulter has said bonjour, so hopefully that means that everyone's coming through loud and clear. Please to get your questions in. If you've got any questions for Tom, any questions for me, any abuse from yesterday's show, especially the end of it where some controversy got stirred, then please do send your comments. I want to jump in, Tom, and one of the questions that I continue to get from people, even though we did a big Physio Matters podcast about this, people still are really interested as to what it is about sciatica that has really got between your teeth and you've really got stuck into it. So I wonder if you'd mind answering that again.
Yeah, and Nina asked me this as well in our recent podcast, and I kind of reeled off a list of reasons, although I was kind of aware I was just making them up as I was going along. I don't really know why. This is all very philosophical, but it's probably the best place for it. I don't know how much insight we really have into why we're interested in things, but for whatever reason, sciatica has been it for me. I could say that it's because I've had a bit of sciatica myself, which obviously makes it feel a bit more real, because it's one of the things that is hardest to get your head around when you're a junior, and also probably just a sense of I can be quite particular about wanting to get things right sometimes, maybe to the point of being pedantic, which I think might have been the kind of gateway into it, all that stuff about radicular pain, radiculopathy. That makes some people's eyes glaze over completely, but I love that stuff, kind of what word means what. So I think that as well was kind of a bit of a gateway. But then also it's just like there's this sort of reinforcing thing, isn't there, of we're going to talk about Twitter a bit today, aren't we? And, it helps kind of get this kind of runaway momentum of things, because you've got this immediate feedback of people saying, that's interesting what you're doing. And, we're all human. We like it when people kind of react well to, what we're saying and what we're putting out there. So there's probably just like a loop where it could have been anything, but because some people seem to be finding it useful as well, that gives it that extra momentum to keep going.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'd seen that, and I saw, essentially you tried putting cat videos on, you took some raunchy selfies, they weren't catching fire, but the sciatica material just went off, and so it's then just been fueled by the mob. I hoped that part of your answer would be in that direction, and I suspected it would be with regards to the particulars on detail. Like you are someone, and I'm definitely not as particular or accurate because I'm not as smart as you, but I definitely am bothered about the use of words as if synonyms when they're not, and the fact
Yeah.
that that can then lead to confusion. And so I'm not surprised that that definitely played in why you're interested there. But I definitely wanted to, and that will be a link to our later conversation about, because that is, I imagine, one of the things that fuels a lot of the behaviour around how you manage to filter information, and why you consider accuracy to be important, and that you, I consider to be somewhat averse to spin for various reasons. But before we get stuck into that, I want you to talk a little bit about this latest piece that you've actually had published, and be fair to call it a narrative review. And that is something that, great for you to work with Nina, no doubt, again. But just tell us a little bit about that, and as I'll post a link to it in the chat for those that are watching wherever you get this.
Yeah. So this was, as maybe some people know, I moved to America actually a year ago now, and before I moved, I knew there'd be this period where, like, without going into all the details, like, you can't work until you've converted your visa into a green card, and obviously that period's been much longer because of COVID and everything, which I couldn't foresee that, but I knew there'd be a period where I couldn't practice, and I couldn't even work at all. It's like, well, how am I going to kind of keep myself busy and sort of keep myself productive, and sow some seeds for the future, basically, in that time. And I thought, well, it'd be nice to do a bit of research, because I kind of, just to be a bit more rigorous about things, you get my teeth into something. So I contacted Anina, and I had this idea. I said, would you like to do a review on this topic? She said, no, that's a crap idea, but here's a better one. And that's what we ended up doing. So there's her idea, and kind of she helped me through it, because it is kind of, obviously writing one of these things is very different to actually reading it, and there's a lot that kind of goes into making it. And I roped in my mate Niels as well from Connect to help with bits of it too, who has quite a lot of experience as well doing these things. So we did a narrative review of, as you say, semi-systematic, whatever that means, narrative review of physiotherapy treatment for peripheral neuropathic pain. And as is the way of these things, it was submitted months ago, so I haven't actually read it for a long time. But we chose two sort of exemplar conditions: chemotherapy-induced peripheral nerve pain, and sciatica, radicular pain. And kind of just went through the evidence for exercise and manual therapy, and what we find from them. And focusing on the sciatica thing, because I think it's probably what most people are interested in, although we do sort of try to compare and contrast the two. We found, I guess I can kind of try and not to use too much academic language and just describe like my honest impressions. A fair amount of papers of like very mixed quality. So some, like, you've already kind of read the introduction and you're kind of thinking, I'm not sure about this one. And some that are like really impressive and like really well done, and you like take your hat off to the researchers, all showing like pretty, I'd say disappointing, but like it's sort of a bit of a repeated theme, isn't it? That often these things don't like translate into research of like effect sizes that we would expect them to do. Fairly disappointing effects of quite small effects for the treatments that have been studied so far. And if we wanted to get a bit more granular about that, with radicular pain in particular, there was usually when you do these things, because of like, you read that research is often biased towards finding an effect, and like, just by virtue of doing the research, you often find what you're looking for. Yeah. So you usually expect to find, even if you study like homeopathy or something, a small effect. So I was actually really surprised that in the studies for core stability or core retraining for sciatica, there was almost no effect. It was absolutely tiny, the difference between the intervention groups and the control groups across all but one of these studies. And the one that found an effect was, have I gone blurry? Hang on, yeah. Turn it off and on again. Let me turn it camera off and on.
I don't know why. My signal looks like it's dropped off. I don't know why that would throw yours off.
That's weird. Give it a second, maybe it'll come in. But that was kind of the first thing, is like the there's not even like crap misleading evidence for the core stability, motor control thing. It's just like it just isn't there. So that was like quite a clear message. And then there was a slightly more encouraging sort of picture for the neurodynamic stuff. But again, it was still quite small, and we were quite careful to say that actually at a point in our review, which is like these effects are benefits between group differences, I should say, are quite small, and it might be that it's not the best use of your time if you have multiple sessions with someone.
I actually fell in love with Anina Schmid's work from a 2015 narrative review in Manual Therapy about entrapment neuropathy.
Mm-hmm.
And I found myself being surprised at that, because at that point I was really into the what was considered the hard science rather than it being the translated material type stuff. But what she did in that really, she blended this notion of mechanism of effect and what we feel is going on, and why then interventions might be logically plausible or less so. And I feel like that's what you've managed to do a bit of here, in a sense, in a classically Tom Jesson way, is that you've not said it directly, but it's kind of that, why would we expect motion control and core stability to have an influence on this pathology when we now understand its mechanisms of action, as well as what we would be trying to achieve with regards to what you highlight as being nerve health being the primary thing you're trying to positively influence. Is that purposeful, and do you see that as being part of why your translation work seems to be? I feel that one of the reasons, admittedly, that it's taken off is because you're really weaving those things together.
Let me faff about with my camera. I'm really sorry about this. I think it is my camera.
All right.
I got because I've been talking to very important people such as Anina Schmidt and recently Mark Laszlo. So I got myself a webcam so I would look professional.
And then you set it to Vaseline filter or something. Have you? This from your other web chats that you do in the evenings? I think
you can see my hand quite clearly if anyone wants to see that.
It's just not focusing properly, is it?
To get the screwdriver out.
Mysterious. It's like I'm interviewing a criminal. Shall I take your name off? Well, as far as I can tell, the audio's still fine. No one's been complaining, so we're going to need to just crack on. But unfortunately, yes, you are blurred. But go on.
Sorry,
try and get back to my question.
So the question was like, it was I couldn't quite understand it. It was about, am I weaving together stuff?
I was admitting to my interest in that area from Nina and then from you, is that you're weaving together this notion of mechanism of effect and recognizing that should influence what we feel are plausible or not treatments. Mm-hmm. And I was saying that, was it your intent, with two questions really, was it your intention to do that? And also, do you agree with me that is one of the things that makes your work seem to be really interesting?
Sorry, I'm with you. Yeah. So I think it is because, and it's interesting to me, if I were to add one more thing to what you said about like why is sciatica interesting, is because it does have that thing you can get your teeth into, which is, for want of a better term, this will annoy people, there's still some bio in the biopsychosocial. So there's a lot to get your teeth into. There's a ton of sort of mechanistic studies in poor old pigs and rats and things. So you kind of start constructing this idea in your head of what actually is going on in the nerve, and then you can start linking that to treatment as well. But that's obviously where things get a little bit dicey. This like history of medicine is scattered with examples of plausible mechanisms of effect that didn't translate into effective treatments. So I do try and catch myself sometimes. I think there's definitely a thing, like as you learn more and more about something, and as I'm trying to do, like, communicate that, it's very easy to start building, I don't know what the phrase, like castles in the sky, and kind of these, once, there's one thing in learning something or reading something, but once you translated it into your own words, and then sort of, even if you're very speculative about it, you start to believe it just from saying it yourself and being exposed to it, and forget that there's so much doubt around these things. So I think we tried to avoid that in our review. We gave some like suggestions about the ways that the mechanisms might inform more plausible treatment. So one of them was simply that maybe just getting the blood going, since ischemia or venous congestion is quite a predominant mechanism in probably many instances of radicular pain. just getting the blood going with general exercise. It'd be really interesting to see what that did. And there's a lot of studies, again, with all the usual caveats in rats and mice, to show that, just swimming or walking is, effective for peripheral nerve lesions. And patients often say, in my experience, all I had to do was swim or walk. Once I had that, I was in the right direction. So I think that the mechanisms definitely do shed that light, and they make you it's really helpful to understand the most likely mechanisms, because it helps you not to fall for the bullshit, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But then you have to also kind of stop yourself into thinking, well, in that case, doing this will definitely work, or
Yeah, you don't want to get carried away on a theme. It's easier for it to be refuting rather than it being promoting. I do agree. As you know, and many of the listeners will know, because I go on about it all the bloody time, I had an episode of which it really disrupted my life for a time with sciatica. Led to me needing to have spinal surgery, and I've unpacked that on a podcast at full length. But as you can imagine, time passing means that the more work you do in that space and the more interested I am in that for various reasons, means that I'm always playing rewind and trying to reflect on whether or not my decision making or my story would have been influenced differently by better information from yourself and others, etc. And Michelle Angus, she was never gonna say it explicitly, but I think both on and off air, she sort of felt that I'd maybe been a bit. I could tell that she sensed that I was being a bit cavalier sometimes with how I'd gone about managing that. And so I think that if I'm feeling that with a patient hat on of a sorts, then I can so imagine that many others are. And so you're having great influence in that direction across various different stakeholder groups, if you dare call it that. But generally speaking, that your work is translating really well. And I want to thank you for doing it, but also really, really try and encourage you to continue to, because it is fascinating and it's affecting many people in many ways. So for those that haven't yet, then please do. We've put the link there on the chat, wherever it is you're listening to this. Apart from, I think, maybe if you're on Twitch or LinkedIn, then you probably won't be able to click that, but you'll be able to find it easy enough on Tom's social media, of course, as well. Just pull that up as being what you're looking for. Physiotherapy for people with painful peripheral neuropathies, a narrative review of its efficacy and safety. So yeah, please do check that out. But what I wanted to move us on to then, Tom, is you've hinted a few times on Twitter, and I think because I know from off-air chats we've had over the years means that I know you're thoughtful in this direction, is that you really make a conscious effort to filter both professionally and personally on using technological solutions. Is that a fair way of putting it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, yeah.
You're giggling there. Is that because it makes you sound paranoid?
No, yeah, because I worry it makes me sound a bit obsessive, but I think I get quite, I don't know, overwhelmed is the right word, but it's too much information sort of buzzing around. It makes me antsy and unhappy. So even sort of being around, I have a huge amount of trouble if someone's talking on the phone, even in the distance, or that kind of thing. People's phones being and stuff like that really kind of just shakes. It sounds very precious, but it's always kind of shaken my sense of being able to concentrate on anything. So for social media, it's similar. It's Twitter is incredible, and it's not wanting to sound like an Oscar speech, but it allows me to do every kind of thing that's important to me, like write these papers and talk to people and have people like David sort of tell me when I'm wrong and help me out with stuff. It's amazing. But I found that I've had to keep pretty tight reins on it to stop myself from going crazy. And
what do you do?
So I just from a basic sort of time level. So I have a time blocker on my laptop, which is doubly necessary now that I work from home, don't have a job. And it's called Freedom, and I fall into this sort of thing where it unblocks Twitter for me for half an hour at 7 p.m. and then on all day on Saturdays, which just seems to work for me, which means I can kind of dip in, get what I want from it at that time. And then I'm not sort of tempted to go on in the evening, because I do find it. I've never been like a compulsive Facebook user, never been interested in Instagram, but Twitter, like I could just scroll that for hours. And like I know that about myself. So it's like Odysseus sort of tying himself to the mast. It's just like I know not to allow myself to do that. Right. And then once I'm on Twitter, there's certain sort of Chrome plugins you can get that hide. I don't even know what they look like anymore because I've had them hidden, but it's like the sidebar of like drama and rage, where it's just like the latest thing that Trump has done or the latest thing Corbyn is. Well, I haven't heard from him for a while, actually. And then there's also the things that pops up on your timeline. So if David likes something to do with something I don't particularly want to see, because that's not what I'm on Twitter for, then that often pops up in your timeline. And if you kind of aggressively tell Twitter you don't want to see that, it will stop showing you that stuff for a few months and then try and show you it again.
Right.
Retweets are often, I find, like not that high value. So I follow people because I want to hear what they have to say. Some people are careful with retweets, and some people it's quite, they seem to just kind of retweet everything that they kind of react to. And I don't want to also react to that. So it's just about, I don't know a better word for it, but being intentional with my Twitter use. I know why I'm on Twitter, which is physiotherapy, which probably like, that's kind of what I want to get from it, is to learn from the amazing people that I follow and to like hopefully give something back. And I find that I'm not on Twitter for the news. I think it's probably a pretty bad way to get the news. It's probably just going to put you in the sort of swirling pool of rage that everyone else is in if you get the news that way. And so I try to defend myself from that a little bit. But I do also have like, I'll leave it there in case you want to.
There's a few different things. I mean, we're certainly going to be out of time for me to ask all of the dozen of very long questions that you can imagine I want to ask. But one thing that I do want to clarify is when you're a lot of this that you're doing precedes a fairly recent phenomenon of interest in that direction off the back of the Netflix social dilemma documentary, of which is very good, don't get me wrong, but there are it feels like a fair reactionary bandwagon effect where people want to try and instigate some of these behavioral changes without actually reflecting on their own. There are some low-level self-control responsibility features that they could reflect on the fact that they've been part of the hype machine, in my opinion. But I want to know your sort of take on that. Have you seen it, and do you feel like that reaffirms some of what you were thinking, or do you think that actually plays it in a different angle?
I haven't seen it. I have seen stuff like it though, and I think I've heard from the people who were interviewed in the documentary. Right. So I think I have an idea of what it's probably saying. There's certainly a thing out there that I wouldn't want to like give too much credence to, which is the kind of the addiction hypothesis. I think there's this idea that these kind of mavens, these puppeteers in Silicon Valley have designed this eternal sort of scrolling slot machine that we're all now addicted to. And it's definitely addictive properties of social media. And sometimes I've like kind of look up at the clock and think, what have you been doing for the last hour? But I think we don't want to we don't want to dichotomize things too much. We don't want to go and live in a log cabin type of thing. And I would have no intention of like coming off Twitter because it's given me so much like in my life. So I think that there's sometimes a dangerous narrative as well of, these things are addictive and exploitative. Around Facebook, there's all these things about it swaying the election. I don't see much evidence that, well, it's another topic, but I think you've got to be careful.
It's actually a relevant overlap for this topic, and one that I wasn't going to ask you about specifically on your take on that, but it's definitely that I want to reaffirm that frustrates me too. And I think unsurprisingly in a way, I think we have sort of touched on this over the years, really, is that the way in which a far end of that narrative strips the autonomy of individuals in such a way that we are literally puppets on string in such a way. And admittedly, a third to a half of the documentary can't help but move in that direction.
Okay.
In fact, and that's what's been a bit of a shame. did you follow Sacha Baron Cohen's intervention, for example, last year, whereby he really stepped up and sort of suggested that the core headline from what he did, where he was making a speech and said that if the Nazis were around now, then Facebook could be running ads for their propaganda in such a way, as long as they paid enough, in such a way as if to say we are all in the process of being manipulated, and when you followed his logic all the way down, it was very much an anti-free speech, stripping people of their autonomy to even think, and that people needed to have things filtered, otherwise they were just the plebs are going to revolt and do things wrong again, and that's hard because there is some manipulation occurring, but I don't feel the solutions. And from what I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I feel like there is an argument that I sometimes see from your stuff that you don't want things to get carried away in that direction too far. So where is the middle ground?
Yeah, and it's a self-sacrificing argument as well, because we're all part of the great computer in the sky now. And it's just, we can't avoid it, and it's good for you to be part of it. It's got me lots of opportunities and things. And as you say, there's this kind of almost kind of religious sort of dichotomizing between like this sacred space of your log cabin away from social media and the profane space of social media, and like you don't want to go for that too much. I just try and be a pragmatist. Like I say, like I know what Twitter is there for me for, and I love that it does that. And so that's why I kind of set out these rules for myself, and these slight like kind of limits on the way it appears for me, so that I can use it in the same way. And I think that's often like something people miss is this kind of like reactive way of using social media. Like you can change these tools, and you can change like the way they act for you. I've mentioned him again. David's an incredible example of that, because he uses Twitter like almost like a filing system, like a slip box or something. Like he's got a tweet for everything, and like it's incredible like what he does with it. So I would say, just to kind of, in the same way that if you were using Excel, like when I see people who can use Excel, when I use Excel, I think, what is this tool for? Like I can add using Google, because I don't know how to do all the incredible things that Excel does. But I think if you kind of approach social media like that, as a kind of tool that you can use, they kind of hide them from you, but there are ways that you can, mute this and change that, and you can be a bit creative with it. Then it has this incredible sort of potential. Mm-hmm. So maybe it's just about, like, as you say, not giving up your agency too much, and, whilst being aware of the fact that you might be particularly compulsive in this manner, like I am. But then, just using it with intention is such a corny term. Is that like a mindfulness word? I don't know why I think having this intention about what you're doing.
I've never thought of it that way, but actually, if you were to go in and comply with it in a not passive way, but essentially just go and almost follow it through in a base level, there is a difference between that and then coming in with some goals that you might perceive that this might help you to achieve, and then helping and trying to utilize it to shape and drive towards those. There is a very different intention to that, and I can imagine it being used in a different way. So that's a really good way of putting it, and I'll definitely need to think on that myself as to how much I am a slave to certain processes, and how much in other circumstances I can already think of ways in which I use platforms probably more intentionally, as you're describing, and other, so it's a balancing act. We are out of time, mate, but I've got one thing that I can't help but want to just see if we can do a bit of extra time on, which is that you've never seemed to comply with what people often like to point out with regards to MSK and healthcare Twitter, as if to suggest that is actually a representation of the hate pool that can exist in current affairs. I've witnessed you occasionally put up an appropriate defense to say, I just don't recognize the fact that it's a really hostile atmosphere. And I do agree with you there, and I found it a frustrating and difficult thing for me as a sort of attention-seeking extroverted, potentially someone that is accused in that space. It's challenging for me to do it. So for you, as a thoughtful, more introverted, and seen as being a real leading light in a more measured space, I've been heartened to see that you don't buy that narrative either.
No, I mean it can feel like that when you're in the trenches, can't it? On some days, but again, I think that's often a result of that less than intentional way of, oh, I'll follow this person, I'll follow this person, and
No.
you know, I still feel like that. I've been very frustrated lately because I think not necessarily the aggression, and this is just the thing in my, like, I don't actually mind the aggression and the rudeness. I think that's always been part of life.
Yeah.
I think, you know, it's that, again, it's another topic, and I'm trying to speak quickly and failing because I know we're 3 minutes over time, but like I don't really go in for the whole argument of like the propriety and manners argument. I think that can often obscure things, and we should allow people to get angry and at times. I think that's important, but sometimes it's the passive aggressiveness that bothers me, or the kind of the circularity of sometimes, like, there's so much incredible information out there. There's so many different perspectives you can take on things, and sometimes it does seem very circular. You know, you mention A, and someone will inevitably come and mention B and C, because you feel like you've missed out B and C, and you've forgotten about the brain, or you've forgotten about this and that.
Yeah.
I think I very much sympathize with, you know, with the frustrations in it. Just like anything, when you're in the trenches, it is frustrating. But then I feel like when I zoom out, it's obviously of incredible value, like that you can talk to, you know, I can talk to you. Like, we probably wouldn't know each other, would we?
Possibly not. No, an angry student frustrated at the gap between what he was being taught in his syllabus and what he was witnessing from the outside, including on our show. And so that's how we met. And so, yeah, I mean, people say we met on Twitter. I always argue we met on Tinder. I forget which came first. But thank you so much as ever for your time, mate. And the country misses you. The MSK needs you. So keep up the good work. And hopefully we can chew it over another time. I drag you out of bed early for us to do this again sometime, mate. All right.
Thanks, mate. My pleasure.
Take care. All the best.
Bye-bye.
Bye.